The first thing I noticed when I opened my front door was not that something was missing. It was that something was wrong. My house looked exactly the same, but it no longer felt like home. The flowers Eleanor always kept by the window were dry. The hallway that had carried her footsteps for 41 years was silent. And when I finally found my wife sitting alone in the back bedroom, I almost didn't recognize her. Eleanor was crying without making a sound. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain. The kind that comes from someone who has been trying to survive something alone for too long. She looked at me, but she did not run toward me like she always had. She looked afraid. That was the moment my heart sank, because I knew my wife. After 41 years of marriage, I knew every expression on her face. I knew when she was worried, when she was angry, and when she was pretending everything was fine. But that afternoon, Eleanor looked like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be safe. Please, before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. My name is Hollis Knight. I am 68 years old, and before that day, I believed I understood the people closest to me. I believed family meant the people who protected you when you were vulnerable. I believed the person standing inside your home was the person who wanted the best for you. I spent 3 weeks away from home working a contract job in Tulsa. It was supposed to be temporary. Just 21 days of long hours and early mornings before I returned to the life Eleanor and I had built together. Before I left, she was recovering from hip surgery, but she refused to let me cancel the job. That was Eleanor. She always worried more about everyone else than herself. Go, she told me. I'll be fine. I believed her because I had spent 41 years believing her. I almost canceled the trip anyway, until our daughter-in-law Marisol offered to help. She smiled and held Eleanor's hand when she said it. Don't worry, I'll check on her every day. Family takes care of family. Those words made me feel relieved. They made me feel like I was leaving my wife in good hands. I thanked Marisol. I told her how much it meant to us. Looking back now, those words were the first thing that hurt the most, because I had trusted the wrong person inside my own home. When I returned from Tulsa, I expected to see Eleanor waiting for me in the garden. Instead, the garden was dying. The tomatoes she loved growing had been left untouched. The herbs she cared for every morning had dried out. It was something so small that most people would have ignored it. But I knew Eleanor. She would never willingly let something she loved disappear like that. Then I saw her, my wife, the woman who had always filled every room with energy, was sitting on the edge of the bed wearing a sweatshirt that looked too large for her. I walked toward her and held her hands. They were cold. Eleanor, what happened while I was gone? She looked away. Not because she didn't hear me, because she was afraid of answering. I'm just tired, she whispered. But I knew my wife was not just tired. A person does not change that much in 3 weeks without a reason. She had lost weight. She had lost confidence. She had lost the ability to look me in the eyes. And the most painful part was knowing she had been waiting for me to come home, not because she wanted to tell me something, but because she finally felt safe enough to stop pretending. That night, while Eleanor slept, I walked through the house trying to understand what had happened. The refrigerator was nearly empty. The kitchen that Eleanor kept organized for decades looked abandoned. There were unopened groceries, expired food, and things that did not belong. Something was wrong, very wrong. Then I remembered the promise Marisol had made before I left. She said she would be here every day. She said she would take care of Eleanor. At that moment, I had one question that would change everything. If Marisol had really been taking care of my wife for 3 weeks, why did my wife look like someone had been slowly taking pieces of her away? And before that night ended, I would discover that the person I trusted to protect Eleanor had been the person I needed to protect her from. When I first met Marisol, I had no reason to doubt her. That was the part I struggled with the most later. It would have been easier if she had always been cruel. It would have been easier if she had shown everyone who she really was from the beginning. But people who use trust rarely begin by looking dangerous. They begin by looking exactly like the person you hoped they would be. When Daniel brought Marisol into our lives, I was happy for him. After Eleanor and I raised our son, seeing him build a family of his own felt like another chapter of the life we had worked so hard to create. Marisol was charming. She remembered birthdays. She asked about Eleanor's health. She brought small gifts when she visited. She knew how to make people feel noticed. The first few years, I thought we were lucky. I thought Daniel had married someone who truly cared about our family. And maybe she did care about them in her own way. But somewhere along the line, something changed. Or maybe the truth had always been there, and we simply did not notice it. The first signs were small. So small that accusing someone over them would have sounded unreasonable. Marisol started asking questions about things that had nothing to do with normal family conversations. She wanted to know how much work remained on the house. She asked whether we planned to stay there forever. She asked Eleanor about retirement plans, insurance, and accounts. At first, I thought she was just being practical. Younger people often think differently about finances. They plan ahead. They organize things. I told myself there was nothing strange about it. But then I started noticing something else. Marisol did not ask those questions when Daniel was around. She asked them when Eleanor was alone. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen while Marisol and Eleanor were drinking tea. They stopped talking when I entered. Not suddenly, not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. "What were you two discussing?" I asked. Marisol smiled immediately. "Nothing important. Just helping Mom think about the future." The way she said Mom sounded warm, but something about the sentence stayed with me. Helping, future. Two harmless words that would later mean something very different. Eleanor never liked discussing money with other people. That was one of the things I loved about her. She believed some parts of life were private. Our finances, our marriage, our decisions. She never needed anyone else to manage those things for us. But after Marisol became more involved, Eleanor started saying things like, "Maybe I should organize everything better." I asked where that idea came from. She just shrugged. Marisol thinks it is important to prepare. Prepare. Another harmless word. Another word that seemed normal at the time. Looking back, I realized Marisol was slowly changing the way Eleanor thought. She was not forcing anything. She was introducing ideas, making suggestions, creating the feeling that Eleanor needed help. That was what made it difficult to see. Manipulation does not always arrive as pressure. Sometimes it arrives as kindness. A few months before my Tulsa job, I noticed Marisol becoming especially interested in Eleanor's recovery after surgery. Again, at first, I was grateful. Eleanor needed support. Marisol offered to drive her to appointments. She offered to pick up groceries. She offered to organize medications. I thanked her because I believed she was doing what family should do. The day before I left for Tulsa, Marisol stood in our kitchen and promised me everything would be fine. "Hollis, don't worry about Eleanor. I will check on her every day. She shouldn't be alone while she is recovering." I remember the relief I felt. I remember shaking her hand and telling her how much I appreciated her. What I did not know was that the person I trusted most during those 3 weeks would eventually become the person I would need to protect my wife from. The strange thing about betrayal is that it rarely begins with one huge moment. It begins with hundreds of small moments you explain away because accepting the truth feels too painful. I explained away Marisol's questions. I explained away her growing involvement. I explained away the way Eleanor became quieter whenever Marisol was mentioned. I had spent my whole life believing family deserved the benefit of the doubt. And that belief was about to become the reason I almost missed what was happening inside my own home. Because while I was in Tulsa believing my wife was being cared for, Marisol was doing something much more dangerous than simply helping Eleanor. She was slowly becoming the person Eleanor depended on most. And when someone controls who a person depends on, they can begin controlling almost everything else. I walked into the garage that night with one thought in my mind. I needed to know what happened while I was gone. Not what I feared, not what I imagined, what actually happened. After 41 years of marriage, I knew Eleanor better than anyone. I knew when she was hiding pain. I knew when she was trying to protect someone else. And I knew one thing for certain. My wife was not someone who simply gave up. She had survived surgeries, losses, and difficult years. She was not the kind of person who became frightened without a reason. 4 years earlier, after several break-ins happened in our neighborhood, I installed a security camera above the garage. I had almost forgotten about it because nothing serious had happened since. But standing there that night, looking at the woman I loved sleeping in our bedroom, I suddenly remembered. If Marisol had really been coming here every day like she promised, the camera would show me the truth. I opened the security app on my phone and searched backward to the morning I left for Tulsa. For a few seconds, I saw nothing unusual. My truck leaving the driveway, Eleanor walking slowly through the garden with her cane, the normal rhythm of our life. Then a blue Honda appeared on the screen, Marisol's car. She arrived at 11:06 in the morning. She carried a grocery bag from the passenger seat, walked into the house, and stayed for about 40 minutes. When she left, she was still carrying the same bag. It looked lighter. At first I told myself there was nothing wrong with that. She had promised to bring groceries. Maybe Eleanor had eaten some of the food. Maybe everything was exactly what Marisol said it was. Then I kept watching. The next day, she came again, and the day after that. Then again that evening. By the fourth day, I stopped looking for one suspicious moment. I started looking for a pattern. Marisol was not visiting occasionally. She was there constantly. Some days she came once, other days she came twice. Once she arrived before 7 in the morning. Another night she showed up after 10. I sat in the dark garage watching the timestamps change, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation, because the alternative was too painful. The woman I trusted had been inside my home every day while my wife was vulnerable. But then I noticed something that changed the way I looked at everything. Marisol always parked her Honda in the same position. At first it seemed random, but after watching more recordings, I saw it clearly. She parked at an angle that blocked the clearest view of our living room window from the street. 17 times. The exact same position, the exact same angle. That was not an accident. That was a habit. I leaned back in my chair and felt something cold settle in my chest. I had spent 36 years working as a lineman. When something goes wrong with a system, you do not just stare at the broken part. You trace the problem back until you find where the failure began. So I went further back. I watched every arrival, every departure, every interaction I could see. Then I found something that made my stomach tighten. On the 7th afternoon, our neighbor, Mrs. Hennings, came to the house. She was 79 years old and had known Eleanor longer than some members of our family. She carried a covered dish and walked to the front door. The camera showed Marisol opening it. Mrs. Hennings smiled and tried to look inside. She appeared to ask about Eleanor, but Marisol never moved aside. She stood in the doorway the entire time, blocking the entrance, keeping the conversation outside. After a few minutes, Mrs. Hennings handed her the dish and walked away looking confused. I watched the recording again. Then I watched the next morning. At 6:30, Marisol walked out of my house carrying the same covered dish. She placed it in her car and drove away. I stopped the video. For several seconds, I just stared at the screen. Someone had brought food for my wife. Someone had taken the time to cook for her. And somehow, that food never reached Eleanor. I continued searching. A woman from Eleanor's church arrived one afternoon. Marisol met her outside and never allowed her inside. A delivery driver brought grocery bags to the porch. Less than 10 minutes later, Marisol arrived. When she left, one of those bags was gone. The more I watched, the more one thing became impossible to ignore. Marisol was controlling access to my wife. She controlled who saw Eleanor. She controlled what entered the house. She controlled the information leaving the house. That was not caregiving. That was isolation. I closed the app and sat there for a long time. Anger came first, then sadness. Because the woman in my bedroom was not only physically weaker, she had been separated from the people who loved her. And I knew isolation was dangerous because it gave one person too much power. I wanted to drive straight to Daniel and ask him how his wife could do this. I wanted to confront Marisol immediately, but something stopped me. I still did not know how far this went. I did not know what Eleanor had been told. I did not know what Marisol had convinced her to do. So I made myself a promise. I would not act out of anger. I would find the entire truth first. Because whatever happened during those 3 weeks was not a misunderstanding. It was a story someone had carefully built, and I was about to discover how deep that story went. I sat in the garage long after I stopped watching the camera footage. The screen had gone dark, but my mind kept replaying everything I had seen. The visits, the blocked doors, the food that never reached Eleanor. The people who came to help and somehow ended up leaving without seeing her. At first, I thought Marisol was trying to hide something, but the more I looked at it, the more I realized something worse. She was not just hiding what she was doing. She was controlling what everyone else could see. That was the difference. A person who makes a mistake tries to avoid being caught. A person who builds control tries to prevent anyone from asking questions in the first place. I went back inside and looked at Eleanor sleeping. She looked peaceful for the first time all day, but I knew that peace was fragile. She was not simply recovering from surgery anymore. She was recovering from something I did not fully understand. The next morning, I sat beside her and asked a question I had been afraid to ask. Eleanor, when did you start feeling afraid? She looked down at her hands. For a moment, I thought she would say she was fine, like she always did. But then her eyes filled with tears. I don't know, she whispered. I think it happened slowly. That answer broke my heart, because it meant Marisol had not changed everything in one day. She had done it gradually. A little fear here, a little doubt there. Enough that Eleanor did not notice she was losing control of her own life. Tell me what happened, I said gently. Eleanor took a deep breath. The first few days after you left, Marisol was wonderful. That was exactly what I expected her to say. Because manipulation often begins with kindness. She brought meals. She helped with my medication. She made sure I had everything I needed. Eleanor paused. Then she started talking. About what? I asked. Her voice became quieter. About you. My chest tightened. What did she say? Eleanor looked away. She told me things that didn't make sense at first. Marisol had told her that my work in Tulsa was taking longer because I wanted more time away from home. She told Eleanor that I seemed distant before I left. She suggested that maybe I was tired of being responsible for someone recovering from surgery. I felt anger rise inside me, but I stayed quiet. I needed Eleanor to continue. I didn't believe her at first, Eleanor said. I told her that wasn't like you. Then Marisol changed tactics. She stopped attacking my love and started attacking Eleanor's fear. She told her that I had been having health problems. She claimed I had chest pains and that stress could be dangerous for me. She told me if I found out she was upsetting me, it could make me sick, Eleanor whispered. She said if something happened to you because I worried you, I would never forgive myself. I closed my eyes for a moment. Marisol had not needed to lock doors. She had not needed to threaten Eleanor directly. She found the one thing my wife cared about most and used it against her. Our marriage, our trust. The fear of losing each other after 41 years together. Every time I wanted to call you, Eleanor continued, she would remind me about your heart. I looked at her. But I never had heart problems. She nodded slowly. I know that now. The words were painful because they showed me how trapped she had become. Marisol had created a world where Eleanor believed asking for help could hurt the person she loved. That was how the isolation worked. First, she controlled who came into the house. Then she controlled what Eleanor believed about the people outside it. Soon, Eleanor stopped calling friends. She stopped asking neighbors for help. She stopped telling Daniel everything, not because she wanted to, because she believed she was protecting me. Mrs. Hennings came by. Eleanor said. I wanted to see her, but Marisol told her I was sleeping. I remembered the camera footage. And the church friends? Eleanor looked embarrassed. Marisol said they meant well, but they would only make me tired. Slowly, Eleanor had been separated from everyone who could have noticed what was happening. And once everyone else was gone, Marisol became the only voice Eleanor heard every day. That was when I understood the real strategy. The money and paperwork came later. First, Marisol needed Eleanor to feel alone. She needed her to believe she had nowhere else to turn. She needed her to doubt herself. I held my wife's hand and told her something I wished I had said sooner. Eleanor, none of this happened because you were weak. She looked at me. I should have known. No, I said firmly. You were recovering. You trusted someone who told you she was helping. She wiped her eyes. I kept thinking maybe I was remembering things wrong. That sentence hurt the most, because Marisol had not just taken control of my wife's schedule or visitors. She had started taking away Eleanor's confidence in her own mind. I walked back into the kitchen after she rested and looked at everything differently. The empty refrigerator, the missing food, the strange paperwork, the camera footage. They were not separate events. They were connected. Marisol had built a system. Isolate the person, create fear, make them dependent, then ask for things they would never normally give. And I knew there was only one reason someone would go through that much effort. They wanted something from Eleanor, something bigger than groceries, something bigger than help. I just did not know yet how much she had already taken. The empty refrigerator was the first thing that scared me. The camera footage was the second. But the documents I found that morning were what finally showed me the full picture. I had spent years believing danger looked obvious. I thought bad people came with warnings. I thought betrayal came with shouting, anger, and obvious signs. I never imagined it could arrive carrying groceries, offering help, and calling itself family. After Eleanor told me what happened during those 3 weeks, I went back through every piece of mail that had arrived while I was away. I spread everything across the kitchen table where Eleanor and I had paid bills for more than 30 years. At first it looked normal. Advertisements, statements, medical paperwork. Then I found an envelope from our bank. The words visible through the plastic window made my stomach tighten. Confirmation of authorized signer. I opened it immediately. The document stated that another person had been granted access to our checking account. I read the name once. Then again. Marisol Vega. I sat there staring at the paper because my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. Eleanor and I had managed our finances together for 41 years. We had never needed anyone else to access our accounts. Not our son. Not our daughter-in-law. Nobody. I checked the date. The authorization had been processed 12 days after I left for Tulsa. 12 days while Eleanor was recovering from surgery. 12 days while Marisol was the person controlling access to my wife. I went back to the security footage and compared dates. The day before the account change, Marisol had stayed at our house for almost 2 hours. I could not see what happened inside. But suddenly, every late-night visit had a different meaning. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down a timeline. The more I wrote, the worse it became. Marisol arrived. Eleanor became weaker. Visitors stopped coming. Accounts changed. Everything happened while I was away. Then I found another envelope. This one was from our retirement account. Inside was confirmation of a withdrawal request. $22,000. The request was supposedly approved by Eleanor. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was hers, but it did not look like hers. Eleanor had always written with steady, confident handwriting. She had been a teacher for decades. Her notes were clear and organized. This signature looked uncertain, shaky, like someone writing while afraid. I looked toward the bedroom where Eleanor was resting and felt my chest tighten. Someone had not just taken advantage of her trust. Someone had taken advantage of her condition. I kept searching. A third document was waiting beneath the others. A home equity line of credit had been opened against our house. $40,000. Our home, the same home Eleanor and I bought after years of saving. The same home where we raised Daniel. The same place where we planned to grow old together. I stood up and walked around the kitchen because sitting still became impossible. In less than 3 weeks, Marisol had gained access to our bank account, removed money from our retirement savings, and opened credit against our property. None of these things happened randomly. They happened in order. First, she isolated Eleanor. Then she weakened her confidence. Then she introduced paperwork. I returned to the stack of mail and searched again. This time, I found something that made my hands shake. A yellow sheet of paper folded underneath the other documents. The handwriting was Eleanor's, but the letters looked rushed and frightened. It was not a letter. It was a list. Dates, requests, things Marisol had asked her to sign. Bank authorization, retirement forms, credit union doc, jewelry, information. I followed the list slowly until I reached the bottom. House deed. I stopped reading. Our house. The one thing Eleanor and I had always agreed would stay in the family. There was a sentence written underneath, smaller than everything else. I am sorry. I didn't know how to stop. I sat down. Those words hurt more than any financial document, because they proved Eleanor had not been careless. She had been trapped. She had been trying to survive something she did not know how to fight. At that moment, I heard movement behind me. Eleanor was standing in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the papers on the table, and all the color disappeared from her face. "You found it," she whispered. I stood and walked toward her. Yes, tears filled her eyes. "I was afraid you would think I gave everything away." I held her hand. "Never." She sat down slowly. "Marisol told me things about you." My stomach tightened. "What things?" Eleanor looked down. "She told me you were changing. She told me you might not come back from Tulsa." I felt anger rise, but I stayed quiet. "She said you found someone else. She said you were tired of taking care of me." Those words hurt because they were not just lies. They were designed specifically for Eleanor. Marisol knew exactly what would break her heart. "Why didn't you call me?" I asked softly. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Because she told me your heart was bad." I stared at her. "My heart?" She nodded. "She said stress could kill you. She said if I called and upset you, something terrible might happen, and I would have to live with it." I finally understood the full plan. Marisol did not need to threaten Eleanor physically. She used fear. She used love. She used the one thing Eleanor trusted most. Our marriage. Our 41 years together. She turned my wife's devotion into a weapon against her. I looked back at the documents on the table. The money was not the biggest loss. The biggest loss was that Eleanor had spent 3 weeks believing she was protecting me while someone was taking advantage of her. I reached for my phone, but before making any call, I looked at my wife. "Eleanor, listen to me. Whatever she convinced you to sign, whatever she took, we will handle it." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Hollis, I'm sorry." I shook my head. "You have nothing to apologize for." Because for the first time since coming home, I knew exactly what I was fighting against. Not a misunderstanding, not a family disagreement. A plan, and whoever created that plan was about to discover that they made one mistake. They underestimated how far a husband would go to publicly cheating the felt plan. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea she barely touched. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I had spent hours finding documents, watching camera footage, and building a timeline. But none of those things prepared me for hearing what my wife had actually lived through. Evidence could show what happened. But Eleanor's voice would tell me what it felt like. "Start from the beginning," I said gently. She took a deep breath and looked toward the hallway. "The first few days after you left, Marisol really did help me." I nodded. That was important. Because the most dangerous people are not always the ones who begin by hurting you. Sometimes they begin by making you trust them. "She brought meals," Eleanor continued. "She helped me with my medication. She sat with me when I couldn't move around much. She looked down. I thought I was lucky. Those words hurt because I knew she meant them. Eleanor was not naive. She was kind. There was a difference. "When did things change?" I asked. She was quiet for several seconds. "After she realized I was still calling you every day." My chest tightened. "What did she say?" Eleanor looked at me. "She said you sounded different." I frowned. "Different how?" "Tired. Distant." She swallowed. "She told me maybe the job in Tulsa was not the only reason you wanted to stay away." I felt anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. Eleanor needed to tell the story. She did not need my anger interrupting it. At first, I told her she was wrong. Eleanor said, "I told her I knew you. I told her you would never do that." She paused. Then she started asking questions. Questions. Not accusations. Not at first. Questions were easier to accept. She asked if I had noticed you seemed quieter before leaving. She asked if I thought you were tired of taking care of me after my surgery. Eleanor's voice became softer. I hated that those questions bothered me. I reached across the table and held her hand. Because they made you doubt yourself? She nodded. Yes. That was exactly how Marisol had done it. She did not try to destroy Eleanor's trust in me immediately. She slowly created small cracks. Enough doubt for fear to enter. Then came the worst part, Eleanor whispered. The thing about your health. I looked at her. Tell me. She closed her eyes. She told me you had been having chest pains. My expression changed. I never told anyone that. I know that now. Eleanor wiped her eyes. But she made it sound like she was protecting me. She said she didn't want to scare me, but she thought I should know. I felt my hands tighten. Marisol had turned a completely false story into something that sounded like concern. She said if I upset you with questions, it could trigger something serious. Eleanor's voice cracked. She told me that if you died because I stressed you out, I would never forgive myself. I looked away for a moment, because that was the moment everything became clear. Marisol understood Eleanor better than most people did. She knew my wife would fight for me before she fought for herself. She knew Eleanor would rather suffer silently than risk hurting someone she loved. After that, Eleanor continued, I stopped calling as much. I looked at her. Why? Because every time I wanted to ask you something, I remembered what she said. She stared at the table. I thought I was protecting you. That sentence was almost impossible to hear. My wife had spent 3 weeks suffering because she believed silence was an act of love. What about the visitors? I asked. Eleanor sighed. Marisol said people meant well, but they didn't understand my condition. She told Eleanor that too many visitors would slow her recovery. She convinced her that resting meant staying away from everyone. Slowly, people stopped coming. Neighbors stopped seeing her. Friends stopped hearing from her. Even Daniel received fewer updates because Marisol always had a reason why Eleanor needed rest. I started feeling like I was becoming a burden, Eleanor whispered. I immediately shook my head. You were never a burden. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I know that now. That was the hardest part. Eleanor knew now. But for those 3 weeks, she lived inside a version of reality that Marisol created. When did the papers start? I asked. Her face changed. I could see the shame returning. After she convinced me you were pulling away. She explained that the first document was the bank authorization. Marisol told her it would make buying groceries easier. She said Eleanor was tired and should not worry about small things. Then came the retirement withdrawal. Marisol told her Daniel needed temporary help and that everything had already been discussed. Then came the home equity papers. I told her no, Eleanor said immediately. I told her I wanted to wait until you came home. I felt a small sense of pride hearing that. Even afraid, even confused. Eleanor had tried to resist. What did she say? I asked. Eleanor looked at me. She said she would call you. I waited. She said she would tell you I was accusing her and creating problems. Eleanor's voice dropped lower. Then she said if you became stressed and something happened to you, it would be because of me. The room became silent. For 41 years, Eleanor had been my partner. She knew my strengths and weaknesses. She knew what scared me and what comforted me. Marisol had taken that knowledge and used it against her. I am sorry, Eleanor whispered. I immediately shook my head. No, Hollis, no. Listen to me. You were manipulated. You were isolated. You were frightened. This is not your fault. She looked down. I should have known. You trusted someone who was supposed to be family. I squeezed her hand. That is not a weakness. For the first time since I came home, I saw a small change in her expression. Not happiness, not yet, but relief. She finally understood that she did not have to carry the blame for what someone else had done. Then Eleanor looked toward the living room. There is something else. My stomach tightened. What? She took a breath. I recorded her. I stared at her. What? She explained that during the final days, something about Marisol's words started feeling wrong. Eleanor had an old digital recorder from church meetings. She hid it near her chair because she wanted proof in case nobody believed her. I felt my heart begin to race. Because after everything we had found, there was still one thing missing, proof that could not be explained away. "Do you still have it?" I asked. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I think so." We stood up together, and for the first time since I returned home, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt hope, because Marisol believed she had controlled every part of the story. She believed Eleanor was too afraid to speak. She believed I would never know what happened inside my own house. But she made one mistake. She underestimated the woman she was trying to silence. We found the recorder underneath a pile of old sewing supplies in the living room. It was a small silver device Eleanor had used years earlier for church meetings. I held it in my hand and looked at my wife. A few days earlier, she had been afraid to even tell me what happened. Now she was standing beside me, ready to face the truth she had been trying to survive. "Are you sure you want to hear this?" I asked. Eleanor nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of the recording, fear of remembering. I connected the recorder to my laptop and waited. There were 7 audio files. Most were short. Some were only minutes long. I opened the first one. At the beginning, all I heard was ordinary conversation. Plates moving, a television playing quietly in the background. Marisol's voice sounded calm, almost caring. That almost made it worse, because I knew what came after. I opened the next file. Again, nothing unusual at first. Marisol asking about medication. Marisol asking if Eleanor needed anything. If someone had heard only those few minutes, they would have thought she was the perfect daughter-in-law. But then the tone changed. "Eleanor, you know I'm only trying to help you." My wife's voice was quiet. "I know. Then you need to understand why this paperwork matters." I stopped the recording for a moment. I looked at Eleanor. She closed her eyes. "Keep going," she whispered. I pressed play. Marisol continued. "Hollis is not here right now. You need someone to handle these things for you." Eleanor answered softly. "I told you I wanted to wait until my husband came home." There was a pause. Then Marisol's voice changed. The kindness disappeared. "And what happens if he comes home angry because you made this harder?" I felt my hands tighten. Eleanor looked down at the table. "She said things like that all the time," she whispered. "She always made it sound like I was causing problems." I continued listening. The next words made everything inside me go cold. "You don't want to upset Hollis, do you?" Marisol asked. "With his health problems, stress is dangerous." My jaw tightened. There it was again. The lie she used to control my wife, my non-existent heart condition, the imaginary danger she created to keep Eleanor silent. Then Eleanor's voice came through the speakers. "I just want my husband." For a moment, I had to look away, because those 5 words carried everything my wife had been feeling. She was not worried about money. She was not trying to fight. She simply wanted the person she trusted most. Then Marisol answered. "Then stop giving yourself reasons to call him and upset his heart." The room became silent. No one spoke. We did not need to. We both understood what we were hearing. This was not confusion. This was not a misunderstanding between family members. This was someone deliberately creating fear to control another person. I played the remaining recordings carefully. Each one revealed another piece. Marisol asking about documents. Marisol explaining why Eleanor should not talk to anyone else. Marisol becoming frustrated when Eleanor refused to cooperate. In one recording, Eleanor clearly said she did not want to sign anything involving the house. Marisol responded with a sentence that made my stomach turn. "If something happens to Hollis because you refuse to help, you will have to live with that." I closed the laptop. I could not listen to more. Not because I needed more proof. We already had enough. But because I had finally heard the full cruelty of what Eleanor experienced. Marisol had not simply taken advantage of paperwork. She had taken advantage of love. She knew exactly what Eleanor feared. Losing me. Being responsible for my pain. Being alone after 41 years together. And she turned those fears into a weapon. Eleanor reached for my hand. "What are you going to do?" she asked. A part of me wanted to drive straight to Marisol's house. I wanted answers. I wanted to hear her explain how she could do this to someone who trusted her. But anger would only help her. People like Marisol survive when emotions take control. I had spent my life learning that the truth is stronger when it is protected. So I copied every file onto 2 separate drives. I saved the original recordings. I saved backups. I documented everything. For the first time since coming home, I was not reacting. I was preparing. The next call I made was not to Daniel. It was not to Marisol. It was to the person who could make sure the truth could not be ignored. Our family attorney, Carlton Pruitt. Carlton had helped Eleanor and me with legal matters for more than 25 years. When I explained what I had found, he did not interrupt. He listened. Then I played the recording. When Marisol's voice filled the room, his expression changed. "Hollis," he said quietly, "this is no longer a family disagreement." I already knew what he meant. The papers, the money, the isolation, the fear. Everything had become part of something much bigger. "What happens now?" I asked. Carlton looked at the files in front of him. "Now we make sure she cannot rewrite the story." For the first time since I walked through my front door and saw my wife crying, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Control. Not control over Marisol. Control over the truth. And she had no idea that the one person she believed was powerless now had the evidence that could bring everything down. I had spent the last few weeks trying to understand what happened inside my own home. But after hearing Marisol's voice on those recordings, something changed. I stopped asking myself why she did it. I stopped searching for an explanation that would make her actions easier to accept. Some choices did not need excuses. They needed consequences. Carlton Pruitt listened to every piece of evidence before he said a word. The recordings, the bank documents, the camera footage, Eleanor's handwritten notes. He carefully reviewed everything and placed each item into separate folders. "Hollis, the first thing you need to understand is that you cannot confront her." I looked at him. "You mean I should just let her keep pretending?" "For now, yes." That was the hardest thing he could have asked me to do. After seeing my wife hurt, after hearing what Marisol had said to her, every part of me wanted to walk into her house and demand answers. But Carlton was right. Anger was exactly what someone like Marisol would expect. "If she knows what you have," Carlton continued, "she has time to create another story. She can move money, destroy messages, pressure Eleanor again. We do this correctly." I hated waiting, but I understood patience. My entire career had taught me that rushing often helps the person hiding the truth. So I followed his instructions. The first call was to our bank. I brought the documents showing Marisol had been added as an authorized signer without my knowledge. The branch manager, who had known Eleanor and me for years, looked through the paperwork carefully. "Hollis, are you saying your wife did not willingly request this?" I placed the recording summary on the table. "I am saying she was pressured while she was recovering from surgery and isolated from everyone who could have helped her." The bank immediately began reviewing the transactions. Accounts were flagged. Future withdrawals were restricted. Every movement of money connected to Marisol was preserved for investigation. Then we moved to the retirement account. The $22,000 withdrawal was placed under formal review. The paperwork remained, but the circumstances behind it were now being questioned. The signatures were not enough anymore. The question was how those signatures were obtained. Next came the house. Our home was not just a financial asset. It was 41 years of memories. It was where Eleanor and I raised Daniel. It was where we sat together after difficult days and celebrated the good ones. When Carlton discovered the property documents Marisol had started preparing, his expression became serious. She was moving toward ownership. I nodded. She wanted control. Carlton immediately contacted the county office and began the process of challenging any transfer connected to coercion or manipulation. Every action Marisol had taken quietly was now being examined publicly. But the most important step was the elder fraud investigation. Carlton contacted Deputy Reyes, who specialized in cases involving vulnerable adults. She came to our house the next day. She did not treat Eleanor like a victim who could not understand what happened. She treated her like someone whose voice had been taken away and needed to be heard again. "Eleanor," Reyes said gently, "start wherever you feel comfortable. My wife told her everything, the lies about me. The fear about my health. The pressure to sign papers. The way Marisol controlled who entered the house. The way she slowly made Eleanor believe she could not trust her own decisions. I sat quietly and listened. I had heard the story before, but hearing Eleanor tell it to someone who could take action felt different. It was the first time in 3 weeks that she was not simply surviving. She was being believed. Before leaving, Deputy Reyes gave us one warning. Do not let Marisol know what you found. I nodded. She still thinks she is ahead. That was true. Marisol was still calling, still leaving messages, still pretending to be the caring daughter-in-law. That afternoon, her voice came through the answering machine. Eleanor, I am worried about you. Please call me back. I just want to make sure you are okay. I watched Eleanor's face as she listened. Months ago, those words might have comforted her. Now, they sounded different. Not caring, controlled. I reached over and turned off the machine. She doesn't know, Eleanor whispered. No, I said. And that is our advantage. For the first time since I came home, I saw something return to Eleanor's face. Not anger, not revenge, strength. Marisol believed she had spent 3 weeks controlling every part of the story. She believed Eleanor was too afraid to speak. She believed I would never discover what happened. But she made one mistake. She underestimated how much a person will fight when someone they love has been hurt. And soon she would learn that the quiet husband who came home from Tulsa was not looking for revenge. He was preparing for justice. Daniel arrived at our house the following evening, with no idea why I had asked him to come alone. Marisol had apparently told him that Eleanor and I were overreacting because of stress after my trip. That was the story she had chosen, and until that night, part of my son still believed it. Dad, whatever happened, we can work this out, he said as he entered the kitchen. I looked at him and felt something heavier than anger. Daniel was our only son. I had taught him to ride a bicycle in this driveway. Eleanor had stayed awake beside his bed when he was sick. Now I was about to show him that the woman he married had used his mother's love against her. Sit down, I said. He looked confused. Where's Mom? Resting. I placed the first folder on the table. Daniel opened it and saw the bank authorization giving Marisol access to our account. His expression changed. She told me Mom asked her to help with bills. I placed the retirement statement beside it. $22,000. Did your mother ask her to take this? Daniel stared at the number. Marisol said you both wanted to help us. Did you ever hear that from me? He said nothing. Then I showed him the home equity documents. $40,000 against the house. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. I didn't know about this. I believed him. The shock on his face was not something he could fake. There's more, I said. I opened the security footage. He watched his wife turn away Mrs. Hennings. He watched her remove food from our porch. He watched her arrive morning and night while Eleanor became increasingly isolated. Dad, I don't understand. Neither did I. Then I placed the recorder between us. Daniel stared at it. What is that? Your mother started recording Marisol when she became afraid nobody would believe her. I pressed play. Marisol's voice filled the kitchen. You don't want to upset Hollis, do you? With his heart problems, stress is dangerous. Daniel looked at me immediately. Heart problems? I don't have any. The recording continued. Eleanor's frightened voice came next. I want to wait until Hollis comes home. Then Marisol answered, If something happens to him because you refuse to help, you will have to live with that. Daniel went completely still. I watched the truth reach him in stages, confusion first, then disbelief, then something much more painful, recognition. Turn it off, he whispered. I did. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the refrigerator humming behind us. How long? He finally asked. 3 weeks that we can prove, maybe longer in preparation. Daniel covered his face with both hands. She told me your money problems were getting worse. I stared at him. What money problems? His hands dropped. She said you were struggling. She said Mom wanted us involved before you lost the house. Another lie. Another piece of the same plan. Marisol had not only manipulated Eleanor, she had been building separate versions of reality for everyone around her. Daniel looked at the folders again. What happens now? An investigation has already started. His head snapped toward me. Police? Elder fraud. Investigators. Daniel stood and paced across the kitchen. Dad, she's my wife. I nodded. I know. You don't understand what you're asking me to do. I'm not asking you to choose between your wife and your parents. He stopped. Then what are you asking? I looked directly at him. Choose between what you know is true and what would be easier to believe. That silenced him. I did not want Daniel to destroy his marriage for me. I wanted him to look at the evidence and decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Finally, he sat down again. There are transfers into our joint account, he said quietly. I asked where the money came from. She told me it was a consulting payment. I felt the last piece click into place. Can you show investigators? Daniel looked toward the hallway where his mother was resting. His eyes filled with tears. Yes, that single word changed everything. Marisol had spent weeks making sure Eleanor felt alone. She had lied to me, manipulated my wife, and hidden the truth from her own husband. But now the isolation she depended on was breaking apart. Daniel reached for the recorder and looked at me. I need to hear the rest. I pressed play. And as his wife's voice filled the kitchen again, I knew Marisol had finally lost the one thing that had protected her from the beginning, our family's trust. Marisol was arrested 6 days after Daniel gave investigators the financial records from their joint account. There was no dramatic confrontation at our house, no screaming, no moment where I stood in front of her and told her she had lost. Justice did not need my anger. By then the evidence spoke more clearly than I ever could. The recordings showed coercion. The bank records showed where the money went. The security footage showed how carefully she isolated Eleanor. Daniel's statements connected transfers Marisol had hidden from him. Piece by piece, the story she built collapsed under the weight of the truth. The $22,000 taken from our retirement account was traced. The home equity transaction was challenged before Marisol could gain control of the property. Her access to our accounts was removed, and every document she persuaded Eleanor to sign was reviewed. For weeks, I had imagined that moment would feel like victory. It did not. I mostly felt tired, because when someone hurts your family, punishment cannot return the days they stole from you. It cannot erase fear from the person you love. It cannot make trust innocent again. The real victory came much more slowly. It started one morning when I found Eleanor standing in the garden. She was holding the watering can with both hands, because she was still weak, but she was smiling at the tomatoes. They look terrible, she said. I laughed for the first time in weeks. They've had a difficult month. She looked at me. So have we. Eleanor began eating normally again. Her strength returned little by little. She started answering phone calls from friends. Mrs. Hennings came over with another covered dish, and this time Eleanor opened the door herself. I watched them hug on the porch and had to turn away because my eyes filled with tears. That simple moment meant more to me than any court decision. Marisol had tried to convince my wife that she was alone. Every person who walked back through our door proved she had failed. Daniel struggled in a different way. He separated from Marisol and cooperated with the investigation, but knowing the truth did not make it painless. One evening he sat beside me on the porch and said, "Dad, I should have seen it." I understood why he blamed himself. Eleanor had said the same thing. So had I. That's how people like this survive, I told him. They make everyone else feel guilty for trusting them. Daniel looked toward the garden where his mother was working. Do you think she'll ever forgive me? I shook my head gently. Don't ask her for forgiveness yet. Give her a reason to trust you again. He nodded. That became the beginning of something better. Not forgetting. Not pretending nothing happened. Rebuilding. Months later, Eleanor and I were sitting at the same kitchen table where I had first found those bank documents. She reached across and took my hand. Do you know what scared me most? She asked. I expected her to say, losing the house or losing our savings. She surprised me. I was afraid I had become too old for anyone to believe me. I squeezed her hand. You never became too old to matter. That was the lesson I carried with me after everything ended. Growing older does not make your voice less important. Needing help does not give someone permission to control you. And family is not defined by who calls you mom, dad, husband, wife, son, or daughter. Family is defined by what people do with the trust you give them. Marisol believed Eleanor's kindness made her weak. She believed my absence made my wife defenseless. She believed age made us easy to manipulate. She was wrong about all three. I once thought justice would be watching the person who hurt Eleanor lose everything. I understand it differently now. Justice was watching my wife walk back into her garden without fear. It was watching her laugh with friends again. It was watching her realize that what happened to her did not define the rest of her life. Money can be recovered. Documents can be challenged. Houses can be protected. But dignity has to be rebuilt one day at a time. And if there is one thing our family learned, it is this: never mistake someone's kindness for permission to hurt them. The quietest person in the room may simply be waiting until they have enough truth to make sure you can never silence them again.